Welcome back to Asking for Knowledge. I'm your host, Jeff Mabe. This is episode 4. Today's topic, Great Expectations. So if you listen to episode 3, you are probably wondering, Jeff, why is this not First Principles Part 2, as you discussed? Well, I already had expectations set up and ready to roll. So that's what we're rolling with. We'll pick back up on First Principles Part 2 very shortly, but for today's episode, we're talking about expectations. If this is your first time listening, this is a version of Asking Out Loud. Again, I'm your host, Jeff Mabe. This is me going solo, sharing ideas, challenging assumptions, doing my best to get to first principles on everything youth baseball. Now, we're probably going to have some scope creep. If you are not familiar with that term, that basically means I say the program is about youth baseball, but the chances are it is going to go much deeper, much wider, and much broader than just youth baseball. It's in my nature. If you don't enjoy it, you don't have to listen. So, next version of the show, Asking the Experts. We will bring in folks from within the system. Talked about the system on episode 3, how we define that. I won't go into that on today's episode, but we're going all throughout the system to understand what's really going on, what are the best practices, who's getting what should we be doing, what shouldn't we be doing, what is best for the kids, and what is best for the families. And then the last type will be asking your parents. This will be where we bring parents on to discuss their experiences, get their feedback. That we'll be giving feedback from parents and surveys that we send out. Part of our mission means that we must keep our finger on the pulse of what parents and families are experiencing as a part of this. And so we'll be sharing those results here, and that'll be a part of that segment. If you have never heard of Asking for Knowledge before, our mission, our core focus as an organization is to help young players master the mentality, mechanics, and joy of baseball. And I'm sure if you've listened for more than a couple minutes, you'll understand that we are not talking to, on most of our episodes about your swing or your athleticism. We're talking about ideas and principles that are much deeper. And over time, we'll get into those things where we break down some of those nuances. But there are plenty of people on the internet, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok that have advice coming out of their ears. So lots of resources out there. There's not many that are taking a quick time out to say what is actually happening. And it's hard to question things without people feeling like you're really challenging or unhappy with it. I want to be clear in saying that that is not the end goal for our organization or for this podcast. The goal is to really understand who's getting what. Is everybody, are all parties getting what they want out of the current system? And if not, why not? And how do we make a change where people can get what they want out of this thing? That's the goal. And that's it. And at the end of the day, how do we influence, support, encourage the next generation of athletes that are going to participate? Because this will be our future as a society. One small niche, yes, in baseball, but I do have a good feeling this is going to expand into other areas as well. So I'm going to start out today. Again, topic of today is great expectations. I'm going to start with a funny story from my oldest son's first practice. Let me tee it up for you. He's 4 years old. Great kid. Listens well. I got asked to help coach. I don't think I had any prior youth coaching experience. Maybe I helped at a clinic or two back in the day, but But I don't know that I don't think I ever formally coached anybody at anything in that way. And so we show up to practice, and I don't know, I was maybe 28, 29 at the time. And I had an understanding of the world that went something like this. I hustled every time, all the time, as a player, in every sport. I did work outside of the game. I did everything I could possibly do to maximize my potential. I was driven to be the best. I was driven to make the coaches happy. And that was my attitude. That was my mentality. And at 28, 29 years old with this 4-year-old son, I had the expectations, you know where this is going, that he would be the exact same way. That maybe he wouldn't be the best. I never was. Maybe he wouldn't be the most athletic. I never was. Maybe he wouldn't hit the most home runs. I never did. Maybe he would be average or maybe slightly above, which I was. But hustle was the minimum expectation. And again, I think you know where this is going. Hustle was not what he exhibited. If anything, it was the opposite of that. And so I had this moment as a parent where I said, oh no, this is not what I expected. Because again, I was smart enough to know he's not going to be the best. Probably not, right? Statistically speaking. He's probably not. I had no expectations for him as a player. I had expectations for him as an athlete. So, needless to say, those expectations were shattered pretty quickly. And as a dad, I was a little bit upset at first, but I pretty quickly came around, and he did pretty good. When I say pretty good, I mean he did his thing, right? Was not my thing. But then again, maybe I wasn't that motivated at 4. I don't know. I do remember by maybe 5, 6 years old, I was pretty motivated. So anyway, it's a funny story, but it's so true. And it happens on baseball fields every single day of the week. Happens on a lot of other fields and courts as well, but it happens. And if I'm being transparent about expectations, they have been one of the most torturous things in my entire life. I'm a visionary. I'm an optimist to the core. I believe in people. I believe in their capability. I look at what humanity has done, and I just am amazed over and over and over again at an even higher rate these days. And so I have grand visions of what can be accomplished, and so many times by the time the thing is done, it never matches what I had in my mind. Being clear, I would not recommend this as a strategy for life, but having no expectations or goals for the future is not very much fun either. So let's get a conversation going. Because I have lived a life. Thankfully, I didn't do this to my son, but I've lived a life in my own head where my expectations were way bigger than really what I could accomplish in a lot of cases, facing reality. And I tortured myself over it. So I want to, as early as possible, make sure that we at least start talking about it and talking about it in terms of how we communicate to our kids. If you're a coach, if you're a parent, making sure that we balance expectations, because we can't have none. If we have none, then we're kind of a juice box team, right? We're playing for the fun of it, get the snack after. We got our butts beat 20-0, but we still should be happy about it. And I don't think that serves us very well for life. So we got to have something. But I don't know that the pro-parent approach of constant lessons and constant aggravation and instigation to work harder and to work more and to professionalize at 6 and 7 and 8 years old, I don't know that that's the answer either. But let's at least talk about it. Let's have the conversation. What I'm about to tell you is probably going to be pretty controversial. Could be. But it's a quote from a man named Dan Mohler. He's a pastor. And I got to be honest, when I heard this quote, it transformed my mind in a way that I had never experienced. And that quote is, your children are not a reflection of you. I'm going to say that again. Your children are not a reflection of you. There are probably hundreds of millions of parents that would fight me tooth and nail over that statement, that would get extremely offended by it. I've had it happen, as I brought up that quote before, where folks say, what in the world do you mean your children are not a reflection of you? How can you say that? What about values? What about morals? What about standards? What about the things that you teach them? How can you say they're not a reflection of you? Well, I can say it because they have their own will. They have their own choices. At the end of the day, I can teach, I can discipline, I can create standards, I can create rules and laws and all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, that child has his own or her own will to make the choices that they want to make. And it's why you see in our society, let's just say a child grows up in an alcoholic home. You see instances where one child grows up in that environment, they vow to never drink because they grew up in that environment. Another child grows up in that environment and they become an alcoholic themselves. And they say, well, what do you expect? That's what I grew up in. That's what I saw. That's what I experienced. It is individualized. Each child, each person gets their own will. They get a vote. And so to say that a child is not a reflection of you, it is an important thing, because as a parent, you can do everything in your power to teach and lead and love and support and educate, and the child still makes a decision that's different from what you taught. So at that point, at the point where they choose their own will, their own way, it's impossible to say that they're a reflection. Are they influenced? Are they influence is probably the best word. Are they influenced by you? Yes. Do your best to instill those things. This is not hands off. Where I'm going with this, and we actually may wrap here in a couple minutes, and then we'll pick back up on this one a little bit later. I want these episodes to be short and digestible. But where this is important is in the idea of expectations. Because if I expect my child to do everything like I say, when I say, how I say, I'm probably setting up a living hell for them and for me. But if I continue to point the way, if I continue to show the way and point the way and make suggestions and remind them that it's their choice, at the end of the day, it's their choice, I think it balances some of this out. Okay? That's all I'm saying. You can fight with the quote. All right, so real quick, and again, if you notice big pauses, if you notice weird sounds, I don't edit this podcast. So I shoot it straight through. If I need to cough, I need to take a drink of water, I turn the mic off. But that's about it. I've decided that I want the focus to go into both the research and the other work that we do, and I don't want to spend time or resources editing and shooting a video and all that stuff that comes with the podcast. So if that hurts us in viewership, that's fine, or listenership. I don't know if that's the thing. If it hurts us, that's fine. But if you notice big gaps, there's nothing wrong with the audio. It is me just gathering my thoughts. So the main goal for today's podcast was and is to start the conversation around expectations and just get us to start with the realization that we all have them. And then from there, and we're going to kind of peel the layers back on the onion, if you will, begin to shine a light on future episodes as to how that affects our thinking, how that affects our emotions, how that affects our treatment of our children, coaches, umpires, all of those things. Because some of the conversations that I see on the weekends between coaches and players, between parents and players, between parents and the umpires, would indicate that a lot of our expectations are not being met. And so my hope would be if we acknowledge up front what those expectations are, we can at least maybe manage it a little bit better. Maybe we can have more productive conversations. Maybe the kids will be better. Maybe the teams will be better. Maybe all of us will be happier and our blood pressure will be lower. I don't know. So again, shining the light, whether we realize it or not, every time we come into a new situation, we have expectations for our kid. We have expectations for the team. We have expectations for the coaches, the umpires, and depending on our mindset and our kind of programming, we are somewhere from in between, if you will. Winning is everything and having fun is everything. So the analogies that I use, again, not to be redundant, but just for future episodes, are pro parents and pro teams versus juice box teams, and everywhere in between. So we're going to wrap. This will be part one of expectations. You're probably going to notice a trend. We had First Principles part one on the last episode. We've got expectations part one. It's hard for me to get stopped once I get going. So I want these episodes to be digestible. I don't want to go, 30, 45, an hour every time. So we'll probably do it in little 15-minute chunks and then revisit and expand upon these ideas as we go through. But I hope that is a precursor just to get the wheels turning a little bit, to say, what are my expectations for my kid in baseball? What are my expectations for the coaches that coach his team? What are the expectations for that team in terms of how they perform and what their results are? Does a winning record matter? Does the position my child play matter? What's my perspective and why? Digging deeper, having a better understanding, I think the better we are able to look at this and understand and have a bigger picture, the better everything will be for everybody. That's my take on it. Again, we're going to analyze it. We're going to break into it. But this is really the first episode where I'm kind of giving some of my ideas. And I hope they're beneficial, and I hope they, if nothing else, prompt you to think. And to think long and hard as you're having those conversations with your kid, as you're signing them up for stuff, as you're writing checks for travel and uniforms and new equipment and all these things, to really say, what do we want out of this and why? What are my expectations? What What are we looking for? Thanks for listening. Look for Expectations Part 2 if you got something out of this. I hope you're enjoying the show. We may eventually get to a better structure, but we probably won't. So until then, enjoy me breaking everything into 10 parts. I promise it's not a tactic. It's more of a thinking style. If you're enjoying the show, share it with a friend. Subscribe or follow on whatever program or platform you are currently listening through. And give us feedback. Participate in our surveys and let us know what things you would like us to talk about. Until next time, keep asking for knowledge, and thanks for listening.